Hey guys, welcome back to Advanced Photo Manipulation Movie Poster Effects. My name is Kirk Nelson. We're now on lesson number 13. In this lesson, we'll look into how to create our own custom cloud brushes, and then use those brushes to put down a layer of smoke and dust in our scene. Okay, so here's where we left our robot after adding some lighting effects last lesson. Now in this lesson, we are going to create some custom cloud brushes and use those brushes to lay down a layer of smoke and haze and dust that would be around his feet here. That serves a couple of purposes. First of all, it adds a little bit to the realism. Any type of destruction that takes place in a city environment does tend to generate a giant dust cloud. Anytime that there's any type of fire or explosion, there's going to be smoke. So in that sense, there's some realism associated with it. But the more useful purpose of it is it can be used to cover over anything that's challenging in the compositing field. I know it sounds like a cheat, but do you ever wonder why on all these big movies that include these giant CG creatures, the main action sequences always seem to take place at night during the rain? They use the same technique. They're concealing a lot of those details that are difficult to get exactly realistic by adding something that's easier to create realistic and obscures some of the other things. So, to begin with the clouds, I'm going to use this same file that we ended up using for the background clouds in the image, and I'm just going to pick an area that I think has a good sense of puffiness that looks like it could be very smoke-like. For instance, I will just grab, say, this area here. All right, and then I will copy that, go to a new file, and paste it in. All right, then I want to desaturate it, and I need to adjust the contrast significantly by using a levels command. This is all familiar material. We've done this before. Now, because the way the brushes work, we need to have the black areas as the positive area. So if we want to paint with this cloud, the cloud needs to be black and the background needs to be white. So let's put in an invert adjustment layer, which does exactly that. Now that does mean the background needs to be fully white, but because it's behind an invert adjustment layer, that means we fill it with black. Okay, so now from here, let's add a mask to this and begin masking out those hard edges until we get an image that looks a lot like that. So then we need to create a single layer from this, and that's either by merging them all down together or creating a merged layer on top. Just for this purpose, I'm actually going to merge them all together. So I'm going to flatten the image through Layer, Flatten Image, and then I'm going to trim out the white areas so that there's not empty spots in the brush. So that's through Image, Trim. I'm picking the top left pixel color, and that pulls all that out. It doesn't look like it necessarily, but it makes it a nice tighter brush file. So now we go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and we can call this one Cloud 1. Now don't stop with just creating one brush. Go through and do that for a couple of them. Create a couple of different intensities and shapes and distributions of these clouds so that there's a lot more variety in the final artwork. Get some that are kind of wispy, some that are more clumpy and voluminous, and some that are lighter and thinner too. Okay, so back here on our main project file, I'm going to add a new layer for the front clouds, and this will be the smoke that takes place in the foreground here. So I've got it all the way at the top of the layer stack. Now I'll grab my brush tool, and let's pick one of those cloud shapes that we just created. There's that cloud 1 here. I'm going to open up the brushes panel as well, because there's some adjustments here that we need to do. We need to increase the spacing so that we get individual tips of the brush, which will create individual clouds. That still doesn't look realistic when you paint on it with that, because there's some more things we need to do. Let's go to the scattering. We can do the scattering for both axes. That's fine. The shape dynamics, you want to turn on the flip X jitter, because that will randomize the horizontal flip of that brush tip. And if you flip the Y, it makes them upside down. It looks a little bit weird. So you want to keep the flip X enabled, but not the flip Y. You also want to increase the size jitter, but you want to have a minimum diameter. So you don't want tiny clouds. You want to keep a minimum of about 30%, something around there. The control should be turned off, not to fade. All right, now this creates a more useful cloud type brush. But there's still more that needs to be done to it. It looks like I need to pull down on that spacing some. All right. Because also, we want to turn on the color dynamics. All right. And then we want to increase the foreground background jitter. Because what we'll do is we'll set the foreground color to a deep gray and the background color to a lighter gray. And then as we increase that background foreground jitter, it gives more realistic coloring to the smoke. Now in this case, I'm going to reduce the opacity some too and start painting in some of this smoke area. Now to get some more detail in it, you can change the mode of the brush to one of the other blending modes like multiply. And that'll give you some better detail in the brush. And then by reducing the opacity of the layer, we make it a little less opaque, a little more transparent there, so things start to come through. Now again, don't use just the one brush. Vary between those different brush tips that we created so that you get a lot more variety in the smoke and you see more of the texture of the dust clouds, and it creates a much better looking blanket of smoke here. Okay, so here I've created 3 different cloud layers to create those foreground clouds, and each using a different one of those cloud brushes that we created. So I've got a nice dense thick smoke going on here, and I've also included an area that looks like there could be an explosion or something there, and I did that simply with the exact same brush that I was using in the cloud area, but I just changed the colors. I changed the colors to a bright white and yellowish, and then just kept dabbing that in to create that bright explosion area there. All right, and then we use the exact same technique to create some of the background clouds too. You'll want to add those over the reflection layer, so it's on top of that. And this is where we will paint in the clouds that will be seen underneath his legs and going back into the background here, concealing some of those buildings in the back. Now, the further away you're painting the clouds, the smaller you want your brush tip to be. Keep that in mind because the size and texture of these cloud plumes do scale with distance, just like anything else. And if you have a really big one back there, it doesn't quite look realistic. So they would be smaller even in the back. And you can also darken the colors a little bit too for the background area. Okay, now keep in mind these layers are independent. They can be moved around, they can be erased or masked and scaled. They can even be warped if you want to do that to create a better coverage effect and make it look like the smoke is streaming to someplace. Those are all valid techniques. You just need to experiment some with your own composition and your own artwork to get a realistic looking sea of dust that our robot is stomping through. Okay, so the last aspect of adding this cloud dust effect in here is the color wash portion of it. And what I mean by that is that right now the clouds are all gray with the exception of the hot explosion spot here, but they're all dark black or gray. They're not receiving any of the light that is being used in the composition. So there's no lighting effects taking place on the clouds, which doesn't make them look as realistic as they could. The easiest way to change that is to add a color wash layer. We'll set that to overlay, and then we just use a regular brush this time. Nice soft brush with the opacity nice and low. Set the brush mode to normal again, and just start adding in some color effects here. For instance, near this explosion, we want it to have some of that orangish glow to it. So very lightly begin adding in some of that. And then over here in the shadow of the building, we want to have a more bluish color. Okay, see that already adds to a lot of the realism of the scene. And then of course we need to do the same thing for the background clouds as well. And you can use this layer to not only enhance the colors of the smoke, but also parts of the background too. I added some darker color wash colors, just some deep gray up here over the sky to enhance that too. And a bit of green over here outside the sword so that it looks like there's some green light emanating off this glowing sword. So altogether, this piece is coming along really nicely. All right, guys, that's it for lesson 13. We've added in some smoke and some dust around this. The scene is coming together really nicely. We'll finish off the artwork portion of this poster in the next lesson, lesson 14. I've got just a couple other additional effects that I want to add into this to just really seal all this together in one cohesive composition.